YouTube titles and thumbnails are often full of hyperbole, exaggerations, and even straight up lies to coax you, the viewer, into clicking on the video, for right or for wrong. But now that you're here, I just want to stress that the album we will be looking at in today's video is truly one of the most deplorable covers that you and I will likely ever come across. The album in question is Virgin Killer, which is a title already contentious in its own right, and it was released in 1976 by revered, controversial German hard rock band, the Scorpions. Across their long and illustrious career, the Scorpions have always pushed the boundaries of what is artistically acceptable in rock and roll, continually provoking conservative angst through their crass lyrics, debauch imagery, and most importantly, their, let's just say, more transgressive album covers, such as 1977's Taken by Force, which depicts children playing with guns at a military cemetery, or 1979's Love Drive with its brazen nudity. However, these covers are nothing in comparison to the depravity of Virgin Killer. So, let's talk about it. Virgin Killer's cover art depicts a real image of a 10-year-old girl posing lewdly, wearing absolutely nothing, with a shattered glass effect barely obscuring her privates, and her top half on full display. Hence me having to censor it. It generated such a negative response at the time that the album could only be sold in sealed black plastic bags in some countries, and even more international markets including the USA, Canada, Australia, Italy, New Zealand, and Spain just completely refused to stock the album with this cover full stop, leading to a reissue being released in these countries, which instead featured a generic image of the band, rather than a preteen girl. And this is the cover that you will see on Spotify or Apple Music if you go to stream the album today. Not much is known about the identity of the girl on the cover, who would now be in her late 50s, but Scorpions bassist, Francis Buchholz, recollects that the girl was either the daughter or niece of the cover designer, Stefan Ball, the then West German product manager for the Scorpions record label, RCA Records. And if this familial connection is in fact true, this adds an even darker element to this whole ordeal. It has been rumoured that the young girl's name may be Jacqueline, but this is merely speculation, and it's probably best that her identity remains a secret for her own sake. The image of the girl was shot by photographer Michael von Gimbert, who has said in interviews that he has no regrets over the album, but is rather more concerned at how the general public and the law found it difficult to differentiate between innocent and abusive pictures, which were comments made following an FBI probing into the album's art in 2008 for potential CP. Von Gimbert proclaimed that the goal of the shoot was a blend of innocence and immaculateness in nudity and youth, whatever on earth that's meant to mean, and that any erotic posing would have been counterproductive, as well as illegal. In another interview around the same period, Von Gimbert also noted that he, his wife, the girl's mother and sister, and 3 female assistants were all present during the shooting, and added that he loved and protected children and did not sleep with them. Von Gimbert further went on to say that the Scorpions band members knew from the beginning what was happening with the cover, and didn't mind the artistic choice at all, and that they only disassociated from the choice when the time seemed right for them. This comment by Von Gimbert is noteworthy, as the band members' attitudes and input on the cover have not been consistently accounted for over the years. For instance, we'll start with the Scorpions' rhythm guitarist and main songwriter, Rudolf Schenker, in his comments over the years regarding the cover. In late 2007, Schenker sat down with blabbermouth.net and bluntly stated that the decision was all on the record company. This clearly contradicts von Gimbert's recollections of the Scorpions' views on the cover. Schenker continued, saying, quote, "The record company guys were like, even if we have to go to jail, there's no question that we'll release that." He continues, saying, "On the song Virgin Killer, Time is the Virgin Killer. But then we had to do interviews about it. We said, look, listen to the lyrics, and you'll know what we're talking about. We're using this only to get attention. That's what we do." Even the girl, when we met her 15 years later, had no problem with the cover. Growing up in Europe, sexuality, of course not with children, was very normal. The lyrics really say it all. Time is the virgin killer. A kid comes into the world very naive. They lose that naiveness, and then go into this life losing all of this, getting into trouble. That was the basic idea about it all. Okay, Rudolph. Nevertheless, in a different interview from 2008 with Russell Trunk, Schenker appears to have a more favourable attitude towards the cover, saying that the cover was a, quote, great thing. He does still stress that the band were not involved in its creation, but also acknowledges that he personally pushed the band to really stay behind the cover, as people would think differently when they looked at the lyrics and realised the cover art was being used as a symbol of the lyrics. Like the preceding interview, Schenker again harps on about the significance of the "time is the virgin killer" metaphor in the lyrics and the cover, and how time kills the innocence of youth. Whilst at this point I'm trying to stay as neutral as possible, Schenker's digressions appeared to me as some faux prophetic claptrap to try and both self-justify and deflect from the issue. The reason I believe this is because there are no lyrics that approximate Schenker's sentiment. I know we have to give some credence to the fact that some of the lyrics' meaning may have been lost in translation from German, and likewise metaphors and motifs are certainly not always right there in black and white for the listener, or maybe I'm just a Philistine who can't read between the lines. So let's just give Schenker the benefit of the doubt here, and go with what he's saying, that time is the virgin killer, that destroys the whimsy and purity of youth. Whilst I do agree with the idea that time steals the innocence of youth, as I think most folks would, do you know what else steals the innocence of a child, Schenker? Posing a preteen child naked on an album cover, who doesn't have the capacity to consent for the whole world to see. Now, returning back to the interview, Schenker comments on how he was especially pleased with the album's performance in Japan, as the LP went gold, and even appears to applaud the Japanese audience for not having a problem with the album. Schenker finishes, saying that we would never do it again today, and concludes by larping back to the same old tired cliches of self-vindication that all old school rockers love to use when faced with taking accountability, saying that the Scorpions were a rock and roll band, artists and young guys doing stupid things. Schenker was 28 years old at the time of the release. Hardly a kid now. Next, we'll look at Uli John Roth's account on the matter, the lead guitarist for the Scorpions at the time of the album's release. In an interview from 2006 with MetalRules.com, much like Schenker, he attested that the old Scorpion albums were usually done by other people, implying that the band were not involved in the creating of the cover. Despite being pressed about the album's cover twice, he provided very little in response, just stating that the cover was too obscene for a lot of countries, so another cover was found. However, in another interview from the same year with blabbermouth.net, he did express serious regret over the cover, and refreshingly did take some accountability. I'll read what he has to say in its entirety. Quote, "Looking at that picture today makes me cringe. It was done in the worst possible taste. Back then I was too immature to see that. Shame on me. I should have done everything in my power to stop it." He also again notes that the record company were the ones that came up with the idea. Scorpions vocalist Klaus Meine has also had some things to say about the album, In the late 80s, Miner spoke with the Washington Post about the band's most controversial albums, and whilst not referencing Virgin Killer directly, he did explain that the band's penchant for controversial cover art stems from a desire to, quote, go over the edge. But interestingly, not to offend or make headlines, as that would be stupid. Miner's ethos here about not wanting to offend and not wanting to make headlines does in fact contradict Schenker's statement from earlier, where Schenker claimed that the Scorpions only used the image of the young girl to, quote, get attention. Anyways, in a 2010 interview, Miner commented on the cover art again, affirming that the record label was responsible for, quote, going over the edge with Virgin Killer. However, in the rest of his account, Miner appears fairly indifferent about the problematic nature of the cover, not expressing any real regret, as he sees the decision to feature the lewd image of the girl as an artistic choice that was merited in trying to create a buzz and push album sales. I'll read out the rest of the quote in full, and I'll let you be the judge. Quote, we never did it in the sense of CP, we did it in the sense of art. It is about the song, and the label was pushing the idea because they wanted to get the controversy to help the album sales, and you cannot get better promotion than that. Looking back from the band point of view, it was never an album cover that we took home to our parents and said, look what we released. There were always mixed feelings about it, and even 30 years later, it caused a scandal at Wikipedia because the site for that album was blocked and even the FBI getting involved. All of that after so many years. Can you believe that? Again, I'm struggling to stay neutral here for the time being, as the response to me is so incredibly ignorant and mind-bogglingly tone-deaf. To say the line, you cannot get better promotion than that, in reference to a nude image of a 10-year-old, indicates to me that Miner isn't just a passive enablist in this whole ordeal, but someone who was perfectly fine with exploiting a preteen in the most despicable way possible, simply for the sake of getting more eyes on the band. Nevertheless, as recently as last year, Miner again spoke about the cover during a whole band interview with loudersound.com, which also featured Schenker and post-Virgin Killer guitarist Matthias Jabs. The band were discussing the intricacies of their cover art over the years, with Miner saying there were of course some covers they're not so proud of. Following Miner's comments, the interviewer brought up Virgin Killer, and Miner was much more reproachful this time and expressed some guilt over the cover. I'll read the full quote out, as it isn't too long. In those days, there were covers with images of young girls, like Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy, which could well be the subject of another video in the future. Anyways, he continued saying the cover was not pornography. It was just an expression of art, and that it was supposed to be edgy, but it was not the kind of cover that we proudly show to our folks back home. No way. It is not tasteful, it is wrong, and we shouldn't have done it. Scorpions bassist Francis Buchholz has had little to say about the album over the years, as besides alleging that the cover girl was the daughter or niece of cover designer Stefan Burl, his account is similar to his bandmates. He said in a 2006 interview that he wouldn't do a cover like Virgin Killer again, as at that time, times were different. He'd further go on to say that the cover was the idea of the record company, saying that the record label did this photo and said that they had this great idea. The interviewer replied to this saying, if you did that today, you'd probably get in jail, to which Buchholz responded, it's possible, times have changed. We felt it would go with the lyrics and the title, but nowadays I don't want it printed anymore. Now we can do a different design. To me, Buchholz doesn't really show any remorse here, instead passing the entirety of the blame and responsibility to the record label and how times were back then. It's a rather blasé and insouciant is what it is kind of response. Now, I was originally going to more or less end the video having established the context of the album cover, seeing how it came about, who the parties involved were, and who was responsible. But I know there's going to be some twisted individuals alongside a litany of obsequious, sycophantic, bootlicking Scorpions fans who were going to blindly defend this cover in the comments, in the same way that thousands came creeping out from the swamp they came from when coming to the defence of Anthony Kiedis in one of my previous videos. Despite Kiedis being a convicted sexual batterer, a self-admitted statutory rapist of multiple young girls, and just an all-round slimy creep. Just look at the state of some of these comments here, and trust me, there are hundreds, if not thousands more than the handful I've picked here. Thankfully though, these people are the minority on our channel, but I'm going to have my piece anyways, and pull apart and condemn this vile album cover for what it truly is. First of all, for anyone claiming this is art, it is not. Some might say that the naked human body can be art, and I guess they would be correct, as many great works of art feature nudity, but there is one obvious element here that totally extinguishes the ostensible artistic merit of the naked human body, which is the fact that the person involved is only 10 years old. She is a person whose legal consent to stuff like this wouldn't even be considered for at least another several years. And don't start using the rhetoric that the cracked glass effect covering her private parts somehow makes the cover acceptable, as if anything, it highlights how creative director Stefan Burl and the rest of the RCA Records team knew this cover was obscene and wholly immodest, as by incorporating the shatter effect, they could mitigate any potential fallout. It is indicative of a guilty conscience. There is a reason why Sweden formally declared the Virgin Killer cover as CP. This is not art. This is the abhorrent exploitation of a preteen purely for supposed commercial gain and attention. Second, for people claiming that the girl was okay with this at the time, this does not in way remedy this whole thing. As has been made clear already, she was a child who was fundamentally incapable of consenting to a shoot like this, even with her family's alleged blessing. Now, according to the accounts of Schenker, the girl did state many years later that she was and is still okay with being on the cover. Even though I'm glad that she feels that she hasn't suffered adversely from this, it doesn't change any of the facts of the situation. It was, and still is, utterly contemptible. People may put forward some other examples to try and counter my point, like the baby from the Nevermind cover for instance, who was also clearly unable to consent to the nude pictures of himself. But there's a big difference between these examples. One is a cute little baby, innocently swimming in a pool, and the other is a 10-year-old girl being impelled by other grown men to pose provocatively on an album titled Virgin Killer. As I said, big difference. Thirdly, I know some of those Scorpions bootlickers I mentioned earlier are going to try and exonerate the band members, as it appears that they were not part of creating the cover and just made the songs instead. Now, it does seem from the members' accounts that they were likely not aware of the label's intentions with the cover art, and that they were largely out of the creative decision-making process, in the same way they were for many of their other early albums. However, Schenker and Miner in particular have at some point applauded the label's decision, seeing it as a good way to get attention and push sales. Although the band members have uniformly shifted most of the blame onto the label, each member has at some point expressed at least some regret or guilt about the record cover, often employing the tired rhetoric that they were young, immature, and that those were the times back then, Schenker and Miner have even directly said, "We shouldn't have done it," with the word "we" implying that the band maybe did have the ability to at least somewhat influence the creative decisions of the record label. Now, I'm not saying that the band members could have overthrown the label's decision, but it does seem they had more power at the time than they are necessarily letting on. I think guitarist Uli John Roth was the most transparent in assessing the band's responsibility and agency in all of this, as Roth said that it was done in the worst possible taste. Back then, I was too immature to see that. Shame on me. I should have done everything in my power to stop it. Exactly, Uli. The buck doesn't just stop short of a label. The band members should also be held accountable to at least some extent for enabling and allowing this. Fourthly, for all the old-timers who start uttering the same old tired tropes that the 70s were different, and that's how it was back then, I'm simply not having it. Yes, the sexual landscape in 1976 was definitely different then to what it is now, and some things seen as passable back then are frowned upon today. But in no way does this excuse this artwork, as the sexual exploitation of a preteen was as reprehensible and sordid back then as it is now. This is evident in how so many aforementioned international markets like the USA, Canada, Australia, Italy, New Zealand and Spain, among many others, vehemently refused to market the record until the cover was reissued to something more acceptable. And even the few markets that did permit the original cover, such as the UK, only allowed the LP to be sold in black plastic bags for the most part. So for any boomers or Gen Xers watching this who are still ready to bite, do not even begin to try and trivialise or underplay this as just part and parcel of the times. That is simply not true, and you are sick if you see no issue with it. Finally, the fact that the Scorpions are European does not in any way justify the album's artwork. I'm European, as you can tell by my nasally northern British accent, and I can say that there are certainly some different attitudes towards sex and nudity than there are in the States, for instance, with France and Germany in particular definitely having more liberal positions on such things. But as I'll maintain once again, the exploitation of a preteen girl categorically does not fit in, and never did fit in with the laxer sexual doctrines of Europeans. Unless, of course, you were a French intellectual, but that is besides the point and a subject for another day. I'll conclude then by repeating what I said at the start of the video, that this is truly one of the most vile and disgusting covers that you and I will likely ever come across. Every party involved mentioned today is at blame to some degree. Stephen Burl, the then creative director of RCA Records, is responsible for masterminding this whole operation and giving it the green light, and potentially even using his own family member in a repulsive attempt at trying to generate a supposed commercial buzz. Photographer Michael von Gimbert is also massively responsible, seeing as he was willing to partake in the shoot to fulfill his own twisted artistic satisfaction, regardless of the alleged safeguarding measures he took in protecting the young girl. And finally, the bandmates Rudolf Schenker, Klaus Meine, Uli John Roth, and Francis Buchholz, and also Rudy Lenners, who was the Scorpions' short-lived drummer at the time, should take some responsibility and culpability for this, as they did nothing at the time to try and curb the creative decisions of Burl and von Gimbert. To me, it appears they had little issue with the cover art at the time of its inception, and only fairly recently have the band members expressed any real regret over the cover when pressed about it. Possibly because their attitudes have changed over the years, which I do honestly believe in the case of Uli John Roth, or possibly to keep their dignity, safeguard their prestige, and preserve their reputation as revered hard rockers in the modern era that we live in. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this video. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch another one of my productions. I have plenty more videos like this already on the channel if you're interested, including exposés on the sordid pasts of Iggy Pop, Anthony Kiedis, David Bowie, and Björk, as well as many more already in the works, all of which I'll leave links to in the description, or you can alternatively just find them on my channel page. Please leave a comment if you've got anything at all you'd like to share, and I'll try my hardest to get back to as many of you as I can, whatever your take is. And finally, always remember to subscribe to the Sing Swan Song.